So there's obviously a ton of talk happening right now about the U.S. taking back the Panama Canal, asking to buy Greenland, and then the big one, Canada becoming the 51st state of the U.S. Do I think any of that's going to happen? Probably not, but you never really know anymore. I don't think I could have predicted the massive pandemic that would shut down the world 4 years ago. So you never really know. But some things that I like to think about as someone that really likes to study geopolitics and geography and history and things like that is, well, there's a lot to consume. A lot of my friends are asking me about what I think about Canada becoming 51st state. I would assume it's safe to say, now, not all Canadians. There are examples of certain Canadians that maybe would like that, but I think overwhelmingly Canada does not want that. And this has actually been Canada's a pretty big fear of Canada. They've got a lot of policies in Canada that pushes Canadian culture, tries to emphasize Canadian culture and put what was that recent YouTube law that was passed in Canada about trying the youth? I don't know if I'm going to do justice to this. Something about promoting more Canadian content creators and more things about Canadian culture. Did that pass? Anyways, this has just been a big deal for Canada historically for a while now. They want to continue to, it's hard because they are a nation right next to the U.S. They have 1/8 our population. We have similar origin stories, both coming from the British Empire. They're trying to form their own identity, and they've been doing that for a very, very long time. So they really emphasize that stuff. But it's difficult. It's kind of a difficult thing to do because if there's any country that would merge with the U.S. that would make a whole lot of sense, it would be Canada. It just, on paper, that's a key word. If the U.S. had to choose another country to be its 51st state, it'd be Canada easily. I mean, it would only be barely bigger than the top state by population in the U.S. right now, California. California's got 38 million population. Canada was around there a couple years ago, not anymore because they've been really obviously upping their immigration numbers, which that's a whole nother impact to this whole conversation because Canada's got a whole lot of chaos going on politically with Trudeau and all his policies recently. He's been in there for too long, and it's also a nation, a worldwide thing. All the incumbent leaders around the world have, with inflation, everyone has a negative opinion. I mean, a lot of people are voting. Everyone, I guess, all the countries that had elections this year have voted out their current leader for a new one. And so, yeah, this is a sentiment that's happening all around the world, but this is really affecting Canada right now. And this is a big conversation that's happening in the U.S. and in Canada. But yeah, I mean, it just makes sense because, if you think about it, if the U.S. was going to annex another country that's not already a U.S. territory, so there's obviously been a lot of talks about the U.S. getting their 51st state from D.C. or from Puerto Rico or maybe even Guam. But if you have to have the U.S. annex a whole nother country, Canada makes a lot more sense than Mexico. I'll say that. Mexico overwhelmingly speaks a completely different language. Obviously, there's no official language inside of the U.S., but Mexico has such a different language and culture, and if you've been to Mexico, you can really see it. It really wouldn't make much sense. There would be such a massive Mexican nationalist backlash to just the U.S. completely annexing them. It just wouldn't work. Canada, on the other hand, like I said, there's only 40 million people up there. You could overwhelmingly just have Americans outvote them. When it comes to let's say another Scottish referendum would occur, where Scotland tried to get their independence away from the United Kingdom a couple years ago. Well, if the Canadians were integrated inside of the U.S. and they wanted to get their independence, I guess you wouldn't take the vote of American population. You wouldn't take the lower 48 states and their opinion. You just have to ask the Canadians. But yeah, you could just outvote them. That's a whole nother aspect I don't think a lot of people think about. If you politically speaking, if the U.S. were to integrate Canada, I would make the prediction that this would mean that the U.S. votes for the Democratic presidential election forever. The Democratic nominee for president would always win if you integrate Canada, because Canada, assumingly, would have the most electoral votes, and Canada is just a lot more left-leaning than the U.S. is. So you would that would definitely mean, because what does California have? California has like 40 or 50 electoral votes right now, so Canada would have a little bit more than that. You would obviously have to change the electoral college a bit. You probably couldn't do the 270 thing. You'd have to make the limit to be president like a little bit higher, like 310 or something. I don't know, but yeah, that would make it very, very easy. But what else do you do? I mean, can you if we were to integrate the Canadians as the 51st state, you probably can't keep all that territory as one state. You probably got to divide it up. I don't know how you divide it up. If you divide it up the way that Canada is currently divided up with their provinces, you'd have some really, really tiny new states. Canada currently has 10 provinces, so instead of adding 51 states, imagine adding 60. So the total, sorry, not 60, but the total of U.S. states would be 60. I mean, that would be a mess. I would like to see that flag. That'd be a whole nother element to the conversation. But again, this is never going to happen, but it's just such an interesting time for this conversation to occur, especially because I guess it all happened with Trump making a joke to Trudeau about tariffs and things like that, and he's calling him Governor Trudeau. And it's an interesting time because I think a lot of Canadian population is not happy with Trudeau, and they're probably really asking themselves this question for the first time in a while. I don't know too much about historically how Canadians have felt about maybe merging with the U.S. I would assume it wasn't a very popular idea, but I'm going to see, we're probably going to see some polls. I bet you there's going to be some polls that come out in the next coming days, because this has been such a hot topic about how many Canadians would support merging with the U.S. or doing a union or something like that. I would assume it's like under 33%. There's got to be under a third of the U.S. that would actually, or under a third of Canadians that would actually want that. I feel like a lot of U.S. people would want that, though. I mean, generally speaking, it's messed up, but do Americans support Canadian sovereignty? That's such a crazy thing. But I mean, I'm just thinking anecdotally out of my friends, and if I were to just go and ask people on the street, I can almost guarantee, yeah, of course, Americans are the vast majority of people. No, I wouldn't say the vast majority. I would say over 50% of Americans, if I came out on the street, and that's like the streets of California too. I mean, a fairly liberal state. I can't imagine what the numbers would be if we go to Texas or more of the red states, but I would assume probably a lot of people in California, if you just ask them, hey, would you want Canada to be their 51st state? If you frame it like that, yeah, I think overwhelmingly Americans would be like, yeah. Meanwhile, a lot of Canadians would not want that. One aspect that I think a lot of people aren't thinking of too is the Quebec region, because the Quebec region has already been a big thorn in the Canadian side for so long. Now imagine that, but in the U.S. Does that immediately get squashed if the Canadians become the 51st state? No, I don't think. I think they get really mad, to be honest. But does the U.S. just let them do their own thing? I mean, we would get the vast majority of land and people and resources. Maybe if Canada does become the 51st state, you just let Quebec go and be independent and be at least the good guy in that sense. I mean, Quebec only has about a couple million people that live up there. It's about 9 million, so it's about like 1/4, 25%, a little bit under 25% of the entire country's population. Who knows? Maybe Quebec rejoins France. I know that's what they want to do. Maybe, but there's a lot of interesting questions that I think are not being had here. And I think that, like I said, I don't think this is going to happen, but it'll be interesting to see what happens into the future, because this conversation is being had, yes, the seeds for this conversation is being had. Does it grow in the coming years? Does this idea continue to grow in the minds of Canadians? Because it won't happen now. It won't probably happen in the next 4 years. But what if in like the next 10 years, things are really not looking good? And these ideas have been kind of growing in the minds of Canadians for a while now. Also, don't put it past the CIA or federal agencies in the U.S. to definitely rig an election that would, again, that Monroe Doctrine. Anything that's around our territory, they're that's U.S. sphere of influence. So the Canadians did actually have an election about this. Do I think U.S. agencies would maybe try to tamper with the vote? I mean, historically speaking, it wouldn't be the craziest thing. We did all over South America, Latin America, so I would not be surprised if they skewed the results to be yes, join the U.S. if we really wanted it. I don't know if the U.S. really wants it. But anyways, it's just but it's an interesting conversation to be had. This is just my 2 cents throwing in to the conversation with everything that I know about the history between these two countries. And, there was even a plan there's been a plan on both sides to invade or to defend if it was after World War II or maybe during World War II. The Canadians had a defensive plan or an invasion plan if there was a war between the U.S. It's kind of one of those policies of just like, you have to be prepared for everything, even the absolute worst situations. I'm sure the U.S. has plans drawn up about if we had to attack England again, or if we had to attack the French or all of our NATO allies. There is definitely a file somewhere in a cabinet about what we would do if we had to invade every single country on Earth. Like, of course, and I wouldn't be surprised if every other nation is also doing that very same thing. That's just how you play the game. But anyways, thanks for watching.